So first of all, just looking at Facebook itself and the platform, what's Facebook's approach to football specifically?
I think, yeah, in general, so we look at Facebook as a platform with over 2 billion users. Sport for us is exceptionally important. It sings to everything we do in terms of growing our reach and making the world more connected and also building deeper communities. Out of the 650 million people that are connected to sport, 404 of them are connected to football. So football is overwhelmingly the #1 sport on platform and truly a global sport.
How does it differ? How does your approach differ to a different sport like Formula One or American football, for example?
Yeah, I think that there are some elements that will always remain the same. There is fandom, which is exceptionally passionate, and whether you are a fan of football, tennis, NFL, your passion for your team is going to strive through. And I think that when we're working with a lot of these bodies, teams and leagues, we work with them to help them get the best out of our platform and how they can create real content that sort of resonates with those audiences, not just domestically, but internationally. I think that the piece that I said really is that football truly is a global sport. So when you're looking at some of our top publishers, two of which, Real Madrid and Barcelona, both tipped over the 100 million mark this year. That's the first businesses to actually reach over 100 million followers. They really have to think not just about how they're engaging their fans in Spain, but also how they engage their significant consumption markets in Asia and North America. And that is quite a big job. This is managing not just a platform, but a suite of staff that understand each market, can adjust content to different trends in market, and can see what works in market. But I think that's just a great example of how our platform has enabled football clubs and teams and all sports bodies to really understand their full potential and to connect with fans all across the world.
You mentioned Real Madrid and Barcelona as the two biggest accounts on Facebook from a football perspective. How do you work specifically with those clubs?
Yeah, sure. So our approach, Facebook, as a partnership team, we work with leagues, athletes, teams, and sports media businesses. So Real Madrid, La Liga, and MediaPro, for example. And we'll work with them generally to sit down and understand what they're trying to achieve. I mean, the conversation usually starts off with, we want to get as many likes as we can, but actually try and take it to a much deeper level to them. What are you trying to achieve? What's your commercial objectives? Are you trying to grow and engage with the biggest possible fan base? Are you trying to find new fans? Are you trying to grow the value of your sponsorship deals? Or even are you trying to sell tickets or retail? Each and every one of those sort of commercial objectives from an organization can be served through Facebook. And it really depends on what their priorities are. Some may have specific market priorities. Like some clubs lean to looking at the huge opportunity around football in India. Some look at North America as still a very strong football market and how they can begin to penetrate that audience and how they can create new content streams out there. It really differs, but it's not a cookie-cutter approach apart from the fandom piece, but it's really on what they're trying to achieve.
And what are some of the best ways that rights holders can reach those fans?
Well, video is kind of king on our platform, really. I mean, when it comes from a consumption point of view, the thirst and appetite for video content has never been stronger. The adaptations we've made on our platform, we launched live last year. In fact, it was this time last year we were up here, and my colleague Ronan on stage has been working with Manchester United. We broadcasted the Wayne Rooney testimonial. So that was a game against Manchester United and Everton, and I can tell you, just like football, sometimes you have the best games. This wasn't one of them, but it still managed to engage an audience of over 3.7 million people globally. And that was extraordinary. For an organization that had just really started to understand live, it was an example of how quick, as an organization, we evolve in terms of tools and how those tools are being quickly adapted by the sports industry.
And obviously, you mentioned live, and it's been out there for about 12 months now. How are clubs using live within broadcast rights deals, for example?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the clubs don't have that many live rights. It's usually held up with the league or the broadcasters. But there are occasions where they can come together. All of their objectives can be served on platforms. Certainly, we've seen a lot of clubs this pre-season use live as a way to stream their tour games. We saw some incredible numbers from the likes of AC Milan, who broadcast their games live. Even teams like Aston Villa taking advantage of the platform to get their live sport out there. But it's not just live football. training sessions are immensely popular, so it's almost that passive viewing of almost watching what the coach is doing and actually getting behind the scenes, which, previously before this medium was there, was you only really got that either from the match day program or the articles in the newspaper or what was produced by the television channel. But it really has enabled clubs to give people a very different experience.
What's the biggest change you've seen since the introduction of live on Facebook in the last 12 months?
The biggest, it's probably not so much within football, but from a lot of other sports who were probably struggling to get airtime. Actually, when we talk about football, there's a great example of how we've seen women's football. It really has become like home on Facebook. A lot of the teams, particularly Manchester City, have taken great advantage of the platform to build up an audience, to establish a brand, to not have it being compared to other areas and build a new asset. But also we've seen like emerging sports come about. I sat there the other day and watched live tag, right? It was a room as big as this. And if any of you have seen parkour, it's very simple. You have to chase and catch someone. This is a sport that never really existed before. But because they had the ability to quickly whip something up and go live, they can start to build audiences. And this is the thing that most excites me, new emerging forms. I mean, yesterday in Manchester, we had the 3 versus 3 finals, which was published by Sports Bible. New different formats that are understanding, what does resonate with an audience? How can we change different formats? How can we use all the data that's available in Facebook to interpret audience behavior to create new forms of sport?
How does a right sider get to understand their fan through Facebook?
The data that's available on Facebook is huge. It's a value exchange. As soon as you start publishing, you start learning. So from anything from if you're publishing a live event, you start to understand on a minute-by-minute basis the type of audience that are engaging with you. You start to understand who those reoccurring audiences are. You start to understand the full flight of the funnel. The guys who are just starting to adapt and get in at the top, and those guys that are persistently engaging with the content. And right down to the tip are those that are so engaged with you, they're on the cusp of actually buying something. And we're seeing a lot of teams now who are starting to build clusters around those live audiences. So after a series of events that have gone on, you can then start to say, I want to connect all of those people who are engaging with that 6-7 episodes of content we produced to upsell them something. One of the features we released, again, within the last year is branded content. So this is the opportunity for football clubs and sports businesses alike to actually offer value to their sponsors like never before. So you could give the scenario of someone having 4 or 5 live episodes going on and then allowing access for their sponsor to brand on a very different piece of content which is targeted to an audience. It could be not just specific to the content, but actually to that product they're selling. So if you're a car manufacturer and you really want to make sure that you're targeting that section of that engaged audience that fits your brief, you can do that and put a little spin on it. So it's creating new forms of marketing inventory that clubs never had before.
How are you seeing engagement rates around sponsored content?
It's the trick of it really, and we've done quite a good job of setting guidelines around it. It has to merit what we feel in our community works. We want engaging content on our platforms, but at the same time, we want partners to grow their businesses and it become a sustainable platform. We genuinely believe with the tools we're developing that by putting your content and going free to air, you can leverage that audience to drive your commercial business. For us, we're seeing some amazing branded content being put out there. I mean, and so I think being in Manchester, it's probably fitting just to reference Manchester United when they signed Paul Pogba. That was an exceptional piece of branded content, intertwining Adidas, intertwining a highly emerging musician, Stormzy, into that experience, where it was just great content. And I always like to sort of put it in like kind of event experience when you're doing these things. It's like, have the fan in the middle, have the sponsor here and have your platform here and have the club here. And if you get all those things overlapping right and create the right content, it will tick everyone's boxes. But I think there's a lot of learnings on that. It's not just about abrasively putting up a logo. It's about interstitching that brand into the story. Then it becomes believable. And I think that you get people then liking that content, having more interactions with that content, sharing it. And then that's where the virality becomes. And that's where it starts to escalate in newsfeed and get greater reach. It's not just a TV advert.
Outside of the likes of Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United, some of the most followed clubs on Facebook, what does a smaller club do when it comes to you and says, what can we do for content without a bigger team or a smaller budget?
I think the nice thing is that they have access to exactly the same tools. And that's where I think it's really exciting. Is you are an emerging team. I mean, we've worked with a number of sports properties who have gone live. We've had dodgeball on the platform, and we've had a guy filming it from the sideline on his phone. He can broadcast, with a simple thing like his phone and the way that we've developed tools in our platform. There's no difference in terms of what he can and can't do. Sure, he probably doesn't have the bodies, but he can create his own stories. He can exploit these tools just as much as any other partner. Video is hard, but the one thing that I say is don't sort of procrastinate. Just try things. You only start to learn when you start to do things and you start to get data from the platform. If there's an audience out there, they'll just be pleased that you're publishing it, and don't overthink it. Always be an iteration.
And outside of video, what else is available to a rights holder or to a club?
Well, I mean, not just to talk about Facebook, we have Instagram as well, which is one of our other platforms. And most recently, we've launched Stories this year. So the ability to be able to interstitch short video content and picture content to create this real immersive storyline. We're seeing that just blow through the roof. The creativity from sports clubs is amazing. A lot of the sports clubs realize that and football clubs in particular, that athletes resonate really, really well. And it makes sense. Years ago, you had to go to a club and ask for permission to have access to a player, and then the player would do a Q&A with a newspaper or a TV company, and that would be your only relationship with that athlete. Nowadays, you can engage with them every single day. And we've seen some great takeovers from Real Madrid in particular, with Sergio Ramos, where you're taking him from he's leaving his house, going through the day, and telling these stories, and taking advantage of the creative tools like the drawing the drawing features that are available, the stickers, the masks, anything that is fun and creative, and actually, the more I talk about that, the more it actually reminds me of athletes and how they've started to sort of develop their personalities online. The only way you saw an athlete was when they were on the field. Now you're actually engaging with them and you're hearing way more about them than just what they do on the field. You see their family, their lifestyles. You're connecting with them in a way that you never could before.
And clubs and rights holders can maximise their athletes?
Completely, yeah. I encourage it. I think that it's not rocket science. You look at what works and you see that when you have a player take over your account, the engagement is strong. So utilise that. But again, don't get stuck in your framework. Try new things. We also launched Live for Instagram as well, which has been a great success. I mean, I'm a Chelsea fan, and when we won the league, it was just so much great fun just tabbing into each one of these players' accounts and seeing them depict what it was like to be in the dressing room at that time. The songs, the champagne, the banter, and all attacking Conti as he walked through. Never seen that before. And the fact that it was curated from the eye of an athlete was just amazing.
Outside of that one, what are some of the best examples of content you've seen from clubs on Facebook or Instagram?
I think the creativity never surprises me. I mean, the one to reference today is during the summer there was a hype of transfer activity, and it's very difficult to stand out. And I really liked what Roma did. It was really brave. They went out there and they almost looked at what was funny and engaging, and they created almost these internet meme sort of virals for each of their signings. They didn't take themselves too seriously, and it was great. And for me, it started to actually differentiate them as a brand, not just a football club. And going forward, I think this is the thing that's going to be a challenge for a lot of football clubs. Having a brand isn't just your logo and the color of your shirt. It's actually what you live and breathe. And I think we're going to have to be smarter in terms of portraying that and creating these stories, because that's what consumers are going to want. What differentiates me from the 12 teams that I follow from seeing 10 of their match day stories? Something different. That's going to make me feel sort of more inclined towards those. So those that are really starting to tell a new branded storyline through them are really sort of catching my attention.
And the difference between Facebook and Instagram demographics, I don't know if you can touch on that slightly.
Well, there's certainly more people on Facebook than there is Instagram, and Instagram's growing at a very fast rate. The demographics really differ on an account-by-account basis, but really, I think that you make a good point in terms of how do I engage with different types of audiences? And for those football clubs that are engaging on Facebook and Instagram, they start to be very clever and cute about what content they put out on Instagram. So what is going to resonate with my Instagram audience? What's going to resonate with my Facebook audience? One platform which has the ability to be really targeted on a region by region basis is Facebook, compared to one platform which just has one push. There's no geo filters. So what is the story I'm going to tell in this environment, and how does it differ? So you're right to recognize there are different demographics, and also the platforms differ. And I think that's important for clubs to actually recognize that. Constant question I get asked is, I can go live on Facebook and I can go live on Instagram, which I do. And I think that's where you become creative. The example I gave earlier when I was speaking to a colleague of mine, Dan, was that when you're in a training ground, you might have a training session being filmed from a shoulder camera point of view. That's going live on Facebook. You can see that being broadcast. It's very clean. And then you take your Instagram account and you hand it to a player. Player walks out there, he starts having a bit of banter with the players, he's engaging and looking at the comments that are coming through on Instagram. He closes that piece, it sits in the tray for 24 hours, then it's ephemeral and it's gone. That live training session that you created is then live on Facebook, it turns to VOD, and then when everybody else is waking up in the world and connecting to this beautiful global game that's football, they're getting that experience. So really it's about understanding the tools in your audiences to create those really strong content streams.
And you've already mentioned a little bit about some clubs reaching, Asia as a demographic. How do you think is the best way to target a global audience through Facebook and through Instagram?
Well, there's different things you need to take into consideration. So, first things first, think about connectivity in market. A very strong, video-heavy content stream which works in strong 3G, 4G markets like the US and the UK. May not work in Africa and may not work in India. So you have to think very carefully about what works there. There's still a huge audience, but you have to understand that. You also have to understand how applications differ. So, Android is by far the biggest consumption of Facebook users, and Android applications in markets have different features. So how do you understand that caching capability in some markets? So first of all, understand the platforms and the connectivity, then understand your audiences. So in some markets, they may like a much more lighter touch where they're looking at superstars. I always refer to it kind of like a pop culture piece, where it's like, I want to see what happened this week, and last season. 10, 12 years ago doesn't really sort of resonate with me that much because it's this football thing that's buzzing and it's big and I want to know about it now. But in your core market, those fans would love to see those classic clips where you've got Cantona drifting in and out and doing that quality chip. Those things sort of resonate. So again, it's about using the platform to understand your audiences, seeing what works, and creating content streams. The other thing we see is that people want to feel closer to the club. Wherever you are in any part of the world, being close to that club is really important for you. And if that club then actually reflects that with a little acknowledgement, it pops. So, understanding national holidays and sort of doing little things like that in market really go a long way at making fans feel that their passion for the club is two ways.
I guess you can go quite deep to it, but would you encourage things like subtitles and that kind of stuff for different audiences around the world?
Definitely, yeah, completely. I think that understanding that the features that we have break down certain barriers. Mobile consumption is going to be the one that is always going to be the highest, and not everyone's going to have the benefit of sitting there with their headphones on all the time. So if you're sitting there on a bus or a train and you don't want everyone else to hear that, subtitles allow you to sort of engage that audience. Regional targeting also helps, so the ability to be able to put different flavors of content out. In fact, one of the most creative ways I saw a football club engage with a global audience was with Barcelona. And they've been creating this match day show around many of their events. They did one around the El Clasico. And they had two broadcasters speaking. One spoke in Spanish, one spoke in English. But they both understood Spanish and they could converse. But they were actually talking to the audience. One in Spanish, one in English. And on the TV, you'd think that looks a bit strange. But actually, it resonated really well. Barcelona are really smart to understand they had two audiences speaking two different languages. And live, you can't sort of geo-filter. So how do we trial something like that? And it popped. It was amazing. And even taking advantage of some of their athletes. They had a live Q&A with Gerard Piqué. His ability to flick between languages, it was great. I mean, he picked up the tablet, he was responding to questions, flipping in between language. taking advantage of those assets you have. But I loved it. I mean, it was a great example of someone just going, look, there's a problem here. Live can only go out to one audience. How do we address it? Let's try 2 different languages to see how that works. And they're reaping the benefits from it.
You've mentioned a couple of times already about targeted campaigns, whether it's paid or unpaid. Just tell us a little bit about how targeted you actually can be on Facebook.
Definitely. There's an audience insight section of Facebook you can go in, and it's there to design to give you a good idea of what audiences are available. So you can understand interests, you can understand age. Some of the pieces that I think football clubs in particular don't take advantage of is something called custom audiences. So this is the ability to almost take your season ticket holder list and upload that into Facebook and serve them with a very specific type of content. Now, if you're a top club, you have that luxury that you're selling out week in, week out, that's great. But some of the clubs that still have, struggling ticket challenges with selling tickets, being able to take that audience that you have and have already purchased tickets, upload that into a platform where they are, and serve them a piece of content that almost triggers a reminder that there's a game happening, gives them another way to actually market to those audiences. And then the other cool thing is lookalikes. So you take a section of an audience and you say, actually, I would like to upload this audience, find me people who look like that. And obviously make sure they're the same following of your fan. Don't leave it too broad because you don't want to be targeting rivals. But it allows you to sort of discover all the pinch pointers and data points in Facebook and find new audiences. And they're just 2 of the ways that beyond the organic way of publishing, you can use our paid tools to help drive some of your business objectives.
And then just finally from me, before I open up to the floor, we've obviously seen a lot of changes over Facebook and Instagram across the last 12 months. Are there any new updates that we can expect to see over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the watch surface. It's rolled out in the US now, and it's creating a surface where you can get episodic content. So I've already started to have access to that, one of the privileges of working on Facebook, and I'm following a couple of these new American sort of programs that have been created. There's a basketball one that's been created, and it's almost a little bit of a behind the scenes into this family of 3 very young, talented brothers who are all on their path of becoming professional basketballs. And I love it. I mean, I'm obviously slightly biased working for the organization, but I was sitting there in Newsfeed the other day and it appeared and I clicked on this link and it brought me into the watch surface and I sat back and enjoyed this experience that was really unique to Facebook. It was engaging with the community. You could see the content, the comments appearing. You could see the reactions appearing. It was a very different viewing experience, and I'm really excited to see how that evolves throughout sport.
Thank you. So we've got about 6-7 minutes left. I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions. We've got one. Do we have mics? No mics. Please. Just so that people can hear, the question was, where does Jerry see live going across the next 12 months?
I still think that we haven't even touched the surface around live sport and Facebook. I think you're going to see a lot more coming through. There is obviously there's a number of different live sports that you're probably aware of, which they maybe sell their rights in a few markets, but they're dark in a few markets. Previously, that was a case of going out and trying to find a broadcaster to sell it, or actually convincing someone that, can you put it on your channel because we want that distribution. This is the opportunity for those rights holders now to actually say, I might not be live in Poland or Hungary, but I'm going to go direct to consumer and publish my event live. Now, they're just starting to understand that. It's a very different experience to then passing a block to someone, as you probably experienced yourself. It's about understanding, how do I sort of build up an audience? Using tools like Scheduled Live to make sure that audience appears. And, changing production, because you're suddenly now aware of a whole lot of data that you didn't know before. TV's relied on Barb for a long time, which is a surveys-based data, which isn't exactly as accurate as what you get from the viewing figures on Facebook. So I think you're going to see more of this. And I think you'll see different areas where, live sports might be partnered with a brand. So you go to market where you'll use live and our branded content feature, and you'll have a sponsor who will then sponsor a live event. We've actually seen this in the US. So the US basketball team prior to the Olympics had a number of games on Facebook, and they were sponsored, and they had a whole session like this with a branded backdrop, which had a brand doing the pre-match and halftime shows. So it was very much a case of the brand leading the way in which that was invested, and giving the opportunity for the brand to get all the value from that live audience. So yeah, I think we've only just touched the surface, and this is only going to grow.
Any other questions? Please. We have a mic, sorry, we have a mic.
Hi. Are Facebook looking at VR at all, and how to expand that into the platform and engagement? Because obviously that's a big thing up and coming now. Is it just simply uploading a VR video into that space, or are you actually looking at how to improve that?
Sure. So I think this is a good question around virtual reality. There's a lot of different versions of VR that are out on the market at the moment. At F8 this year, you had Mark talk about social VR. So the ability, and he span up an avatar of himself, an avatar of his missus, and they had a conversation. And then you start to think, how does social VR actually play its way in sport? Sport is social. People gather around pubs, they gather around festivals, screenings, arenas to watch sport. What about this case of me having my friend in New York who's a Chelsea fan and my friend in Thailand is a Chelsea fan, and then actually creating a virtual room, spinning up a virtual television on the wall, and actually sitting back and watching a game with my friends in a very sort of social experience? That is something that, it could be possible in the future, but also retains to our principles of actually connecting the world and building communities. So there's still a long way to come, but we can see from a social VR point of view how that could play its way in sport.
Thanks. Just, one at the back.
Hi. Just wondering, do you work directly with football clubs in terms of education? So I noticed that I think 55% of the Premier League clubs don't have the Pixel installed on their website.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I think that what we can do is we can advise and inform, and I think that's a really good area for you to recognize. Being able to track journeys from Facebook to your area of conversion is a good way of understanding what's working, how do customer journeys work. And I think with Pixels, they're not just about tracking conversion. There's lots and lots of creative stuff you can do with them. And yes, we do advise, and we inform these guys of what's available, but really it's down for them to actually interpret what's important and pressing for them at the time. And as we said at the beginning, it's about what their objectives are, but I'd heavily encourage it. I mean, the more data you get, the more you can be informed. So I think it's good for you to recognize that point.
Thank you.
Just one down in the middle down here. We'll take this one and then one more if there's another one.
Hi there, Jerry. I was just wondering, do you think it's just about connecting with fans through Facebook, or do you think your organizations and partnerships would also be trying to develop an employer brand through Facebook to attract employees to them and to take their companies onto the next level and forward?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think if I understand it, you mean is there a business sort of tool that's available? Is that what you're referring to?
A lot of what you were talking about was engaging with fans through Facebook, but there's also engaging with the public in terms of getting your employer brand out there and that side of it. And I was just wondering if you've also seen that on Facebook.
Sorry, I'm not entirely too sure what you mean by employer brand.
Just so the company behind, so people understand, for example, Man United. Obviously, everybody knows the great commercial brand, but what's it like to work for Man United behind the scenes, the culture? And I'm wondering if you're seeing companies and organizations that you're working with doing that through Facebook. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. I think telling stories from different areas of the club's perspective are really interesting. I mean, who doesn't want to have the opportunity to work for a football club? Who wants to know what goes behind the scenes in the training room and on the training ground? And obviously everyone aspires, and from a front-facing point of view, it's usually the coach or the press officer. But should the club choose to sort of create different content streams behind, the physio or behind the secretary or the chairman, the platform suits that. I think it's about understanding, again, what your audience wants, and if that is a stream that really appeals, and from a communications point of view, it suits your brand, there's no reason why they couldn't do that.
One last question. Okay, well, Jerry, thank you very much. That was really insightful.
Thank you.